Okay, so this is the Ascension of Babylon. If you're new here, what we do is we talk about the occult, we talk about spiritual self-development. If that's your thing, hit that notification bell because I will be posting regularly. Drop a like and subscribe to the channel. And what we're going to be talking about is merging higher density consciousness with the lower density ego. We're going to be talking about the merging of the divine with the human ego construct. And I think in the spiritual community, especially the New Age, there's a lot of demonization when it comes to the ego. The ego becomes something that we want to get rid of, something that we want to destroy, something that we want to kill, basically, where, a lot of people are forming an abusive relationship with their ego, trying to get rid of it, when in fact it's actually impossible to get rid of the ego. We experience everything that we need to experience in a healthy, we could say, state of separation because of the ego. The ego is what makes the human experience unique. It is what gives us the ability to evolve. It is what gives us a unique sense of individuality and self-identity. The ego is a vehicle of healthy separation, and if we didn't have an ego, we would not be able to experience that, and we would not be able to go through the high level of evolutionary progress that on a soul level we incarnated into the human experience to have. So the ego is a very necessary tool of separation that we absolutely need. Now, we don't want to be bound in separation. We want to know that this separation is for a purpose, but we're the creator of our experience and we're not separate from anything that we're creating. We want to know that we're our higher self, which is a fractile of the source energy, and the source energy is everywhere and everything all at once, and that exists within us. But we don't want to demonize the ego and demonize the illusion of separation that we're creating to have a truly important, truly beneficial, and truly evolutionary experience. And the highest levels of consciousness that a human being can obtain is not from disowning the ego or not from destroying the ego, but it's going to be opening up the ego to be a container for higher levels of consciousness, so we can then channel that into the human experience, channel that into our sense of self-identity, channel that into the physical body and through our nervous system. So these are very important things to understand, because if you get into spiritual self-development trying to kill your ego or demonizing your ego, you're actually moving backwards. And at some point, even if you can make some progress, you're going to stagnate, because it's not about that. It's about merging divine consciousness with ego consciousness. It's about opening up the egoic construct to be a container for the higher self, so we can now play the game on higher self level, to where we're not just thinking that we're the human character. We're now operating from a space that we know we're the creator, and this is when the simulation, which is just a simulation of us, takes on a totally different life and responds to us different, because once again we realize we're the creator and we're not operating from a space of separation. But the paradox is we are merging that unity consciousness with the vehicle of separation to achieve the unity of opposites, which is some of the highest levels of consciousness that can actually be embodied. This even goes into the merging of the masculine and the feminine, goes into the merging of objective and subjective realities, where we start to embody that everything is one thing and we embody that wholeness within the ego. If it wasn't for the ego, not only would we not be having a human experience in the way that we're having it, but we would just be basically like this energy kind of floating in space somewhere that has no identity or no definitive form. The ego is, basically meant to give us a definitive form that we can then understand ourselves in relation to and with, and then express ourselves to the world to provide ourselves and other humans a unique evolutionary experience. Now, the problem with the ego construct of most humans is it's going to be heavily influenced by programming, certain belief structures, and even, trauma-based frequencies that get stored in the body, stored in the energy field, and stored in the unconscious. And these trauma-based frequencies create what is known as fragmentation within the psyche. And this fragmentation will often take the form of certain identities and certain personas and certain masks that we wear. So, we have a mask for our friends, we have a mask for our job, we have a mask for our family, and quite seldomly is the average person actually being truly authentic because they're operating from a space where they're identifying with their fragmented ego, with their fragmented finite mind, and they're not funneling their infinite mind, their infinite mind, which is the higher self, into their ego, into their sense of self, and into the way that they express themselves, to the world. What they're actually funneling into that is a lot of suppressed emotional resonance and unhealed trauma that goes back to early childhood. And this unhealed trauma is going to act as an interfering pattern between this kind of person and divine consciousness, between this kind of person and the higher self state of awareness, which can actually be and is meant to be merged with the egoic consciousness. So we can basically thin the veil between separation consciousness and unity consciousness. And as human beings, as souls that incarnate in a body, this is actually what we're here to do. We're meant to merge Malkuth with Kether, the root with the crown, and then, live our lives from that sense of balance. This is why our higher self, which is us, fractalizes itself in the form of creating a soul, which then basically incarnates into this human experience. It's so this merging and it's so this deeper union can actually take place, not only within ourselves, but the entire collective. And I also believe that this benefits the entire solar system, galaxy, and universe at large. So our role in going through what we need to and manifesting the experiences we need to remember what we're here to do is truly important. So going back to spiritual self-development, when we're going through something like ego death, we're not killing the ego, but we're dissolving our identification with the fragmentation that basically makes up the ego, or our identification with the identities that are not actually who we are, because these identities are heavily fueled by trauma and limiting belief programs that are in the subconscious, and they act as an interfering frequency between us in this merging process that I'm explaining. Ego death is when we're dissolving those programs and when we're dissolving our identification with the fragmented finite mind to embrace the infinite mind of our higher self, and then to thin the veil between both of those things and to merge divine consciousness with ego consciousness. But this cannot actually happen if we're identified with, certain belief programs, if we're identified with certain identities that we created as a result of trauma that is existing in our system. And that's why ego death and releasing trauma from the body and from the energy field is always going to go hand in hand, because it sets the stage for this merging to take place. So when ego death is happening and we're experiencing that death energy that's coming into the psyche and even coming into the body, not only are things going to manifest that challenge our false sense of self-identity, but because that sense of self-identity that we created was a protective adaptation meant to protect us and meant to block us off from trauma that's in our body and in our system in general. It's kind of like a dam. As that dam is getting dissolved, the waters of that trauma are going to come to the surface to be processed. This is where the anger sets in. This is where the grief, kind of comes to the surface, the anxiety, the fear, and whatever it is. And by feeling through those things and by acknowledging them in a state of pure presence, we're going to depolarize the negative mass that's causing us to create these false identities and causing us to identify with the fragmentation of the ego. We're feeling it, and then we're releasing it, which is opening us up on that ego level to be more of a container for the higher self energy, to be more of a container for that divine consciousness. And this is actually channeling it through our body. But on a nervous system level, if we have all these trauma-based frequencies, we're going to have to bring them to the surface, process them, and release them before, on a body level and on a human ego level, we can merge with our divine self and then live our human lives as that divine self. This is when God meets the common clay of the physical body. And by God, I don't mean some Abrahamic figure. I mean the source consciousness. I mean the source energy. And what ego death really is, it's an ego maturation that is taking place. It is an ego refinement, and it's a letting go of the interfering patterns that are associated with it, and our identification with the fragmentation that we often, experience as certain identities and personas and things of that nature. It's a letting go of those things so we can then embrace that divine current of energy that we actually always were before we went through certain kinds of societal programming, before we experienced trauma that we, throughout our life, we keep storing in our body and building up this, higher and higher trauma-based resonance. And, before we created the false identity complex to survive that trauma. So essentially, this is what it means to merge divine consciousness in ego consciousness. This is what it means to merge the higher self and the lower self. And as human beings, this is what we are here to do. And as, you do this, you're also setting an example to other human beings that are just actually you at the end of the day, because, everything is one thing when we bring it back to the core of existence. And, we're all evolving together in this way. So that's what I wanted to share to you today. I just wanted to talk about the nature of ego death and merging the ego consciousness with divine consciousness, because oftentimes there's a huge misunderstanding in relation to the ego and spiritual self-development, and that will absolutely set the stage for stagnation to take place. It's not about killing the ego, it's about opening up the ego to be a container for our divine consciousness so we can channel that into the human experience. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I appreciate every single one of you, and I'm certainly going to see you in the next video.